Hey guys, I'm Brittany from Crime Ghoul. You might recognize me from my true crime podcast, Crime Ghoul, where I talk about cases that aren't so heavily covered in the media, but I also do like to dabble in YouTube from time and time again. So here I am on my channel, Brittany Alexandra, where I want to talk to you guys about the new Netflix documentary, The Night Stalker. It's a 5-part series that goes in depth about the victims, the survivors, law enforcement, and journalists that were all involved in the catching of the Night Stalker and how he heavily affected Los Angeles. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about this because there are things that were left out of the documentary, and I'm sure it was done on purpose because really they wanted to hone in on the people who were affected, and I do love that and I'm happy about it. But if you guys have never heard of Richard Ramirez and you just watched that documentary and that's the first time you're ever hearing of him, then you probably have come to the right place because you probably have some questions like, who was he? Why did it happen? How did he become what he was? And all of that stuff. And you'll notice that in the documentary, they did mention a couple of things about being really charming, and the public kind of like some of the females in the public were falling in love with him. So I think they only did a little smidgen about that. So I'm going to talk to you about all of the groupies he had and what that's really about, and psychologically how that's caused and what it's called, all of that stuff. So here I'm really just to bring you portions of Richard's story that was not covered on the Netflix documentary. So welcome. I'm happy you guys are joining me. I love to talk about true crime. I eat, breathe, and sleep true crime. It's my passion, and I hope to one day become a forensic psychologist. So that's why it means so much to me. So I'm a big proponent of understanding the whole picture, and a lot of people are afraid of gruesome and the gory details because you just want to live life happy and go on about your day, which is perfectly fine. But if you're like me, you want to know what leads to certain circumstances and what creates this part of life that is dark and kind of cruel. So we're gonna talk about that today. So if you guys were disturbed by the Night Stalker, I know a couple of people were upset by the graphic content that they showed, but guys, if you want to know about criminals or predators, serial killers, you kind of have to know those nitty-gritty details to understand everything. And if you don't like that stuff, then maybe stick to Dateline in 48 Hours. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love that stuff, but I think it's important to know these details for you to fully understand what happened and what caused this depravity in our society. So let's get started. So Richard Ramirez grew up in El Paso, Texas in 1960. He was the son of his parents. They were Mexican immigrants who came over to America, which I think is the coolest thing. I'm Mexican, so a little personal anecdote that you guys probably don't really care about. But if you're Mexican and you're watching this, woohoo! Yeah, most people think I'm Italian, but I'm mostly Mexican and not Italian at all. So anyway, yeah, this is probably the American dream to some people. Like, you look at it, you look at a family who immigrated over to America coming from Mexico, and his father became a police officer. His mother worked in a boot factory to help bring funds into the home. It sounds picturesque. It sounds great. It sounds like what the point of America is supposed to be. But unfortunately, it's just not that cut and dry. Behind the achievements of this family came a lot of dark and sinister things. So to jump right into it, Richard is the youngest of this family. There were 5 siblings in total. I'm pretty sure the oldest one was a female, and the rest were all boys. So Richard was the baby of the family. So couple of things you need to know. His mom worked in that boot factory, like I mentioned, and she worked the whole time while she was pregnant. And this is bad for a lot of reasons because she was breathing in the toxins that were in this factory, which was not good because she worked throughout her whole entire pregnancies because, of course, she needed money. And you know what? Women can work until they pop a kid out. That's right. We're strong. But unfortunately, back then, they weren't really aware of what they were breathing in and how detrimental it could be to a baby in utero. So needless to say, the children were born with a couple of birth defects. Some of them had respiratory problems. Some of them had bone deformities, so their bones had problems growing. And this obviously could be the beginning as to finding an explanation of what happened to Richard as he developed throughout life. So when Richard was 2 years old, he actually was hit in the head pretty badly by a huge dresser that fell and hit him on the head. It resulted in him getting 30 stitches. And if you guys read about true crime and criminal offenders, you'll know that most of the time these people have injuries to their head. Sometimes the brain is affected, and especially if you're a 2-year-old, you're so sensitive and vulnerable to these things. So he probably had some type of injury to his brain. Even if it was slight, the slightest injury can cause such a difference. So there you go, at 2 years old, that's already going on. I believe at 6 years old, he was actually hit in the head with a swing so hard that he actually was knocked unconscious. So again, hit in the head, not good. Then by 9 years old, he had epilepsy. They found he was epileptic and was having epileptic seizures. So, seizures obviously have an effect on the brain. So now you're looking at 2 head injuries, seizures, and then also at 9 years old, this is the first time Richard ever watched abuse or can remember or recall abuse being carried out on one of his siblings. His oldest brother, Reuben, was horribly beat by his father. So at 9 years old, Richard quickly became terrified of his dad, and Reuben was beat to a pulp. Okay, so now you've got violence into the mix with all of this other stuff going on. He's scared. As he becomes 10 years old, he starts to get the beatings from his dad as well. He was beat so badly. The only thing he really feared in his life was his father. Nothing ever scared him. His father was the closest thing to evil he'd known at that point. So a lot of the time when he was 10, he was running down the street to a cemetery, and that's where he was sleeping because that was the only place he could really find a quiet and safe spot to sleep. And I think of a little 10-year-old shivering in the cold, even though it's Texas, when nightfall comes, it's cold, and he's just sleeping in a cemetery, and that breaks my heart. So now you've got the injuries, you've got the abuse and the violence and the fear, and sleeping in a cemetery. Oh. So at this point, he's becoming more isolated. He's not really with friends anymore. There was a friend he used to hang out on his block, and his name was Miguel, and he said that he started to see this big change in his friend. He was once a bubbly, happy kid who kind of started isolating, and he didn't really want to hang out with anybody until he becomes 12 and his cousin comes home from Vietnam. Now, his cousin was this war hero. He came from Vietnam. He did amazing things over there, so you think. And of course, some of you know that when your family members or friends come back from war, they're not the same. It's a combination of the trauma they went through, or maybe the trauma they enacted on somebody else, and the PTSD from all of their experiences, and the anxiety and the depression that comes with that. And basically, his cousin was not a very good person. He idolized his cousin, and I mean, there's all types of different theories we could throw out as to how his cousin became different, but I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole psych course that I could probably give you, but that's not where we're going with this, really. So, he started hanging out with his cousin all the time. He looked up to him. He was the greatest thing ever. He finally was finding that male bond that he so badly was looking for that he wasn't getting from his father. So his cousin started introducing him to marijuana, and he started smoking weed at 12 years old. And if you guys are science majors, psychology majors, or scientists or psychologists, researchers, or maybe you read a lot and you know that the brain is really plastic at this time. Your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old. So there's a lot of molding one can do to a brain, and a lot of things could negatively impact your brain. So marijuana definitely could have an effect on a child's brain. Of course, that's why you're really not supposed to drink until you're 21. That's what they say. Take that and make of it what you will, but whatever. Marijuana is thrown into the mix, and then he's a prepubescent teen. Boys start to get these urges. Their hormones are kicking in, of course, and his cousin starts to show him these photographs, and they're pictures from Vietnam. So the cousin was telling him of all the stuff that went on when he was there, what he did to women and how he pillaged towns, and all of that stuff. And basically he had pictures of women laying on the ground naked that he had either tortured or raped or killed, other bodies that were killed by him. And he was showing Richard this, and this is really not good. I don't know if he had ever seen a naked female or anything like that, but as far as I know, a 12-year-old's looking at naked, nude bodies. If you're a 12-year-old boy and you see a nude woman or someone nude, that's gonna sexually arouse you, you know, for some boys. Obviously, there's other circumstances, but anyway, for some boys, they start to get aroused by naked bodies at that age. It's kind of natural. But these were the first pictures he's really seeing, and these people were mutilated. So that's where that link starts to come in with sexual arousal and violence, because so far that's all he's known. He's known violence from his father. Now the person he looks up to is saying, yeah, look what I did in Vietnam, and they're naked and talking about raping them and all of this stuff, which is sexually geared, of course. And now these are the connections he's making at a 12-year, like in a 12-year-old's brain. That's what he's putting together. So not good. Then after being with his cousin for a little while, they're smoking weed, they're drunk, they're high and drunk, and the cousin's wife comes outside and is like, what are you doing? I'm sick of you hanging out with your 12-year-old cousin. It's time to get your shit together, get your life together. Let's go. You need to get a job. We have a family. And he's just like, shut up, and shoots her in the face, and she dies. And Richard was witness to that. So now you have, I think, a 13-year-old who witnessed the murder of another female, of a female, another form of degradation of a woman, and now murder of a woman from somebody he looks up to. Again, this is that link he's making between that kind of that element of violence and females, and it's not good. Again, once again, not good. So he never tells his parents that he witnessed that. Not that I think they would have done anything about it. Maybe it's because they were kind of not the best parents, or maybe it's because at that time, you know, depression and anxiety weren't something you talked about. PTSD wasn't something you talked about. Now we do. Back in the 80s, not so much. Actually, maybe even before the 80s a little bit. So it was kind of frowned upon to talk about things like that. So instead, he just kept that bottled up for pretty much his whole life. And lived with it. So now, witness to a murder. He ends up doing some pretty bad things, mischievous things. He's committing little crimes, minor crimes, stealing, theft. He actually steals a car and is driving around in it, and he goes to juvenile detention for a little bit, spends some time in juvie, and he comes out. And then he moves in with his sister because he's not going to live with his parents anymore. His oldest sister brings him in, and you would think that's a great thing, but unfortunately, her husband was a piece of trash as well, and his favorite thing to do at night was go gallivanting and peep on women, peer through their windows, watch them undress, watch them shower, whatever inappropriate things he could find. That's what was happening, and he was picking women and stalking them to their home and hiding behind these trees and fences. I don't know, guys. Let's see. Brain injuries, epilepsy, abuse and violence, drugs, murder. Now we're stalking and watching women at night in their home. Sounds like the perfect concoction for a Night Stalker for Richard Ramirez. You see where this is all kind of linking together? Yeah. Recipe for disaster. So now his sister is obviously annoyed. She knows he's a peeper, and now her husband's bringing her little brother on these little excavades, and that's just disturbing. And somehow Richard goes from Texas to Arizona, where his sister is, and then ends up in Los Angeles, and he starts living on the streets. For a little while, he did have a job at a motel, and, you know, the key holder, I guess the manager, gives him the key, starts trusting him to do things, but instead he's actually going into hotel rooms and watching people in their hotel rooms. He's a creep, he's a pervert. And one night it actually escalates a little further, and instead of just breaking and entering and then getting out to see if anybody would notice or how quiet he could be doing it, he stumbles upon a woman and he attempts to sexually assault her, and her husband's there and comes out and beats the pulp out of him. So that was pretty much the end of that. He also gets caught trying to molest children in an elevator, and that gets him out real quick, and he no longer has a job. Then he goes to the streets. He starts with the acid, LSD, drugs, who knows what drugs, and he's making friends with bums. He is a bum. They say he's not such a bad guy, actually, whatever. But yeah, he's living on the streets, and he's dirty, he's smelly, he's living off convenience store food, so probably ring dings, snowballs, you know, that traditional crappy food out of 7-Eleven or a gas station that you'd find. Sodas, just the sugar's eroding his teeth at this point. And if you guys have seen pictures of his teeth, it's not a pretty thing. So yeah, he smells like BO. His halitosis is astronomical, and yeah, this is what's going on. He's living on the streets, and before you know it, 1984 comes and he kills a 79-year-old woman, and then soon after that, he kills a 9-year-old girl. I'm pretty sure she's from the Tenderloin district, which is in Chinatown in Los Angeles, or somewhere over there, and this little girl's outside playing with her brother, and she has a dollar bill, and the dollar bill blows away, and it goes into the window of a basement, and the little girl goes into the building, into the basement to get it, and in the darkness is a boogeyman, and his name is Richard, and he ends up raping her and murdering her, and then hanging her dead body from a pipe, and the little brother finds her. And it's not until 2009 that the match is ever made, because of advances in forensics and science and DNA matching, that Richard was actually the one who did that. He got away with it for many years. And to me, it just gives me the creeps. It reminds me, you know, he just reminds me of a horror movie, from peeping in motels, like the movie Vacancy, if you've ever seen that, and then luring a child from above to below, kind of like Pennywise in the sewer with Georgie in the boat. This time it's Richard in a dollar bill, and it's just, he's creepy, he's terrifying. And then 1985 comes, and the rest is history, and then you get the Night Stalker that we see in that documentary. So that's a little bit about his early life, from childhood to early adulthood. And that's kind of like where we get that perfect mix of a nightmare. So yeah, then now we could get to the groupies. And this is pretty terrifying, I'm not gonna lie, that there are women out there, even right now, there are women who love murderers. They love criminals. If you go on Instagram, you could find them. Trust me, I show my sister all the time. I'm like, yes, they exist. These people love these men or these women specifically because they've murdered people, they've raped people, and there is a word for that. And the word for that, my friends, is hybristophilia, and that is a paraphilia. So that philia at the end might sound familiar, you know, pedophiles, philia, pedophilia. The end of that, it's really just like, it's like a sexual fixation, really. It's almost like something you can't control. So basically, with hybristophilia, this is people who get sexually aroused by people who've committed really bad crimes like rape and murder. And there were a ton of women in the 80s that were fawning over Richard Ramirez. So we'll start off with Cindy Hayden, and she was actually a backup juror. She was on the jury. So basically, a backup juror is somebody who takes the place of somebody who falls off the jury, who either quits or who does something that's illegal or not legal and they get kicked off the jury. She takes their place on the bench, and she did make her way to the bench for these trials in 1988. And it's there where she starts to fall in love with Richard. Like, you're hearing about these disgusting crimes he has done, and you're falling in love with him. That's what happened. She started falling in love with him. Valentine's Day comes, and she's at trial, and she ends up giving him a cupcake, this pretty little pink cupcake with hearts and icing that says, "I love you," and gives it to him, and she gets her ass kicked off the jury. And then he actually invites her to come meet him in prison. Yikes. So she would go meet him in prison and everything, and of course, when you find someone you love, you want to introduce your parents. So she brings her parents to come meet this murderer. Unbelievable. It's just unreal. And she starts talking to him, exchanging letters, whatever. She is fawning over him. It's pretty grotesque. And yeah, there you have it. That's Cindy Hayden. She loved him. She thought he was just like a misunderstood person. And the fact that he had such a brutal childhood, wasn't being brought up in court, was a problem, because she thought that, you know, he wouldn't have really committed such murders if he wasn't put through such abuse. And you know what? She might be right. But I can see yourself empathizing with a person like that. You know, some people are just like, no, he's a monster. He deserved death and nothing. I don't even want to think about what he was like as a human. And that's the thing we forget. Like, these people look like monsters to us, that we forget there is a human being in there. And there is. And I'm not trying to condone any of his behavior whatsoever. But it is really important to know about that humanity that's inside that shell of a human, and to figure out what caused all of this. But it really shouldn't give her a reason to want to love him. Ugh, no. So yeah, that's her. But among Cindy Hayden would be a line of women who were interested in this man. And there was actually a group of them called the Women in Black, and they used to wear black to the hearings. He would look at the jury and the prosecution. He would try to like make them uncomfortable by staring, and then with some jurors like Cindy, he'd be winking at them and being very flirtatious from afar. And that's what really caught them, that charisma. And even then, he's manipulating the jury and the prosecution. Like, that's a very powerful person, and not in a good way. So yeah, he would see these groupies, he'd wave to them, you know, give them winks, and they felt important. Like, so they were fawning over him, and some of them were self-proclaimed Satanists as well, and that's why they were so infatuated with him. And it's just like, I feel like it's just a slap in the face to the families. Like, I know in the Night Stalker documentary, the one girl who lost her, either her parents, I don't remember, I don't want to screw it up. She's a brunette, she's really pretty, but she said that one day she just couldn't take the trial. She just needed to go out in the hallway area and breathe, and she sat next to this young guy, and he kind of had his head in his hand, and when he like turned and showed his hand, he actually had a pentagram, and that was like a punch in the stomach to her, because her loved ones were victims of this man, and now she has someone who's actually supporting him and realizes, oh shit, there's people here who actually are on his side. And there were just women like that, and women who loved him. It's mind-boggling, really. Then we get to the most interesting part, and that would be Doreen Loy. So, Doreen was the editor of a teen magazine. Now I'm scared, because that's just terrifying. Yeah, she used to edit teen magazines and everything, and upon hearing about Richard, she was convinced that the devil had possessed him, and, you know, had the devil not been inside of him, then maybe he would have been okay, maybe he would have been fine. Whatever you want to believe in, but she started falling for him and wanted to meet him, and she started communicating with him in prison, and she said that he was really charming and funny and kind, and that people wouldn't understand why she loved him because they didn't know him like she did. Yeah. So she started falling for him, and they were together for a very long time. He actually proposed to her in 1988. They wouldn't get married till 1995. And after that, they lasted for 13 years. And when they got married in 95, his brother, his sister, and his niece actually showed up for the wedding. They got married in San Quentin prison. What a venue. What a time to be alive, I'm sure. And she had a short white dress on, super happy. She was in love with him, and that was, like, she always wanted a family and everything, but she knew that being with Richard would mean sacrificing a life like that. She wouldn't be able to have kids. Obviously, if you're a death row inmate, you're not allowed to do the hibbity-dibbity. So no babies for them. Thank God. Thank you. No offense, but who knows? That could have been a recipe for disaster as well. We'll never know. It's not meant to be known. So they were married for 13 years, and she actually left him in 2009. And do we remember what happened in 2009, what I mentioned? That's when DNA matching really skyrocketed and became much better than it had ever been. And they linked the murder of that 9-year-old girl to him, and she was raped. And then other things were coming out about like his crimes against children. And the documentary really didn't touch too much on that. He had a history of molesting children and raping them, and just disgusting. It's just horrible, but they really didn't talk about that. He actually was not convicted of any crime or anything like that. Especially back then, there was a little girl that he had kidnapped from her home and brought her to where he was living at the time and raped her, and then ended up dropping her off in front of a gas station. So there was a lot that he wasn't charged for. Mainly because they didn't want to put any of the children in that situation where they'd have to testify, because of course they were already scarred. What's the point of scarring them more if he's gonna be executed? So they thought, you know, let's death penalty, let's not put anything on there, like no more charges. And personally, like I say, the more the merrier, the more charges the better, but at the same time, a child is a child and it's very sensitive. These brains, obviously we know, again, brains are very plastic at this time, so why put them through something that could be so traumatic and further re-victimize them? But needless to say, his wife left him in 2009 because she found out that he was a child molester and killer. But as if he wasn't bad enough, like, oh, it's okay if he did that to adults, like you can understand that, and you can put that to the side to love him, but then a child is brought in and nope, that's it. Regardless, deplorable acts he committed. Can't even believe the woman liked him. But this brings us back to hybrostophilia. And not to mention, after his relationship ended with her, I mean, there was a few communications with other women, and, you know, he ended up dying in 2013. So, and he ended up, like, not wanting to speak to anybody. He got in trouble in jail, well, in prison, and wasn't allowed to have communications with anyone, what have you. But there were other women who were corresponding with him by letters and sending him nude pictures and risky photos, and nasty people, nasty. Anyway, hybrostophilia, though, like I said, it's a paraphilia. And so yeah, hybrostophilia, what causes it? Well, there was a forensic psychologist who did do a lot of research on this. I'll put her name in the bio because right now I can't think of her right now. So in the notes down below, you could check out her name. I just can't remember it right now, but she did research as to what causes this fixation, this sexual arousal by men who do stuff like this. And a lot of the women who were studied said it had to do with their self-esteem, their inability to form relationships in a real life setting. They weren't able to find a loved one. The fact that they were able to see the child within the murderer. So they saw that there was a child there at one point, and obviously this child was never loved or given the nurture they needed. So these women want to nurture them, and they get off by that. And this hybrostophilia was also called Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. So maybe you heard of it that way. But that's pretty much what it is, and these are the things that they didn't talk about in The Night Stalker on Netflix. So I hope that gave you some things to think about. If you guys want to let me know anything else you thought, like your thoughts on this Netflix documentary, let me know. Your thoughts on what I've said. I know I trip over my words a lot. That's like my downfall. But speaking in front of a camera isn't supposed to be so natural, so don't come for me. I'm just trying my best. Anyway, it's interesting, though, to see, if you watch the documentary, he put an end to the men that he, you know, the houses he went into, he killed the men first, point blank with a gun, most of the time. And it was the women he would rape and, you know, kind of torture, like with words. He was verbally torturing them, like tormenting them. On one occasion, having a woman who's swearing to God, swear to Satan instead. It's just, you know, really taunting these women. And what he did to children, like, listen, I can kind of put it together and make the link in my head, like, okay, the men he eliminated first, because he was probably eliminating his father, his cousin, his brother-in-law, because these were all male figures that he tried attaching to that all turned out to be disappointments and scumbags. So I feel like, you know, he's killing them over and over again by putting an end to the men immediately. And then for the women, look at, again, the links that were made between seeing those pictures of women at a really young age just tortured and mutilated. I don't think his mom was really stopping the abuse, so you've got that. So yeah, he was kind of taking what he was learning and putting it to real life. So really interested to hear what you guys think about the children and why he did that, because I'm dumbfounded and I really want to know why he did it. I don't want to hear, you know, oh, it's just because he's evil. That's not good enough for me. I need a reason, and maybe there is truthfully no reason. But if you guys have any thoughts as to why he assaulted or murdered children, I would really like to hear your theories on that. It's so interesting. Right. Now that I have told you my thoughts on the documentary, if you haven't watched it, go watch it. If you have, let me know what you think. Let me know about your feelings on all these things that weren't mentioned in the documentary. What do you think about it? It's truly interesting. I love to hear theories and insight and all of that good stuff. But if you're interested in hearing more from me, you can click subscribe below, Or you can go listen to my podcast where you don't have to see my face, and trust me, it's a lot easier for me that way. But if you want to hear my podcast, go check me out at Crime Ghoul. You can listen to me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you go check out Instagram, _, I have a link in my bio to my new episode, which is called Slasher, and it's episode 18. And if you are interested in Ramirez because of his satanic practices and because he killed and kind of attributed to his killings to the devil, then maybe you'll find episode 18 interesting. Then maybe you'll find episode 18 interesting because it's about the murder of 15-year-old Elisa Paler. And she was murdered by satanic teens who wanted to sacrifice her to the devil. So I've got a lot to say about that. And yeah, if you want to hear my theories and my thoughts and my analysis on that case and my retelling of the story, go check me out. And if you like this video, share it, like it, subscribe, comment. Definitely comment below. Let me know what you guys thought about this. I'm a brand new YouTuber. I mean, I'm not that great at this, and I'm still a brand new podcaster, but I think I'm a little bit better at that. So yeah, for all of you guys who listen to my podcast on a regular, here's my face, and here I am talking to you guys, talking to a camera. It's always weird. But until next time, stay safe, be aware of your surroundings and who your friends are. Definitely go listen to episode 18, and if not, listen to my next video. That will make me happy whenever I put that out. That said, I'm gonna head out. Thank you so much for listening. It makes me so happy. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, and I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.